Okay, you should have paused it. Right, question 1B. Okay, it's an AO1 and an AO3 question. So you've got to discuss how a certain theme from the extract is reflected elsewhere in the play. And there's 5 marks for the context here. So each point or paragraph you're making, refer it back to a touch of context. And AO1 wants a personal response for you, so they want to know what you make of it. And the examiner's report from last year suggested you should use short quotations, 1 or 2 word embedded quotations. Don't worry, you've got to copy out and remember huge chunks, passages of Macbeth. You don't. Try and maintain a critical style so you are not too conversational or too informal. But you're kind of detached, and go elsewhere in the text. Don't make comments on what parts of the extract that you've just been given. That will be seen as a weakness, I think. Okay, so for Macbeth then, for some contextual touches, you could perhaps refer, if the witches come up, Elizabethan view of witches, and whether and more of an acceptance that they had a power, or a belief that they had power and they were responsible for certain things, tragedies, diseases, disasters, etc. Specifically, you could refer to demonology, which was the text that James I wrote, trying to establish whether there was any power to the supernatural. Patriarchal society, run by men for men, and how Lady Mac would really stand out in that. Decades-long war between Catholics and Protestants, assassination attempts like Guy Fawkes. Might be relevant. I think a key one is the divine right of kings, and how the kings claimed that they were chosen by God and appointed by God, so that murdering them or going against them was an act against God or against religion. Holinshed Chronicles, the source text, Aristotle's terms, and the fact that the English are the heroes probably plays well with the English audience. Machiavelli will be a really important one, and his thinking on Shakespeare's play and his analysis of how you retain power. Certainly you could relate some of your answers and some of the quotations to that, as well as this idea of a Renaissance man. All of those I've covered in another video. Check the Macbeth playlist for Macbeth context in much more detail, and there's a whole video on Machiavelli. So do check that out, and remember, you've got to refer to context all the time. 5 marks in this question. Okay, so that's question 1B then. Again, if you're doing this like a walking, talking mock, I suggest you pause the video now, give yourself 25 minutes to attack it, no more, no less. Okay, and we're back. You should have paused it. If you didn't and you're just learning from this, that's fine too. Section B then. Okay, this is the modern drama. There's 40 marks for this, and as I touched on at the start, you've got 16 of them for how well you write and how well you know the play and your ability to use quotations. You've got 16 for the context, so you've gotta know it for an Inspector Calls or a modern drama. I suggest you have a little introduction, but don't waste any time. Just address the question head on. I think that shows a sign of confidence, and it sort of crystallizes, forces you to really crystallize what do you think, what's your answer, what's your response, and then I would suggest you try and organize your ideas into 3 main areas. You say, I'm going to go here, and then here, and here, and these are the areas I'm going to be looking at, which will prove my point, my argument. Okay, so I would think you aim for 4 to 6 paragraphs. If you can do sort of 2 developed analytical paragraphs for each section, then I think that's quite strong. You may be able to push that further. Similar principles to Macbeth in terms of stretching your explanation and showing the depth and the extent of your knowledge will get you the higher marks. So just as before with that sort of hexagon of hexagons, but specifically this one, every time at least one of them should be you go into the context. Okay. This is some basic things. It shouldn't take you long. You can pause this slide and match up the right answers. They're all there on the right. But these are the ingredients, I think, to get you strong AO1 marks. These are the kind of things that should be in there in a proper exam essay. So worth getting your head around all of those. You can pause it now. Otherwise, we charge on. Right, this is a rough structure for an Inspector Calls or other essay. I think you should have a short introduction where you are responding to the question. You have a sense of immediate urgency to that. You ask me a question, I'll tell you my answer. Bang, straight away. and then you divide your ideas up into three main sections, so you're getting a kind of coherence to your writing. Um, and then each of these quotations that you're choosing, you develop, and you refer to context. When you're using context, don't add on a bolt on a paragraph of history right at the end of the essay to show, oh, I know my history, here's a load of history. That's not how you're going to get marks for it. You need to constantly be referring to the context the whole way through, and show how it enhances your understanding of the play. So you need to show that it gives you kind of extra insight in terms of into what the writer is trying to do. Okay, I think in this essay you need to have these analytical paragraphs. Um, I would suggest going after an EPEE structure, because I think it's kind of easier to get started with a quotation, and then that it's easier to find a point off the back of that. You can sort of in the flow straight away. But your teacher might have taught you other ones, PETAL, petal, or PEAEA. Perhaps there's various ones. I think it doesn't really matter so long as you are having points and you're basing it on quotations from the text, and then you are really trying to stretch those explanations as much as you can. Here's an example of how one might look like, so you can perhaps see an EPEE paragraph on Banquo's ghost. It's color coded here, so I won't read through it all, but perhaps you can pause it if you want to have a feel for what a really serious analytical paragraph looks like. Then there you go, and I want you to see how that expansion is built up. Okay. Specifically, the examiner's report said last year that with Inspector Calls, the best candidates clearly knew the difference between when the play was set and when it was written. And that's a crucial thing. Priestley is trying to get people in a post-war, i.e. post-Second World War environment, to see where they've gone wrong over the last 30-40 years, and look back into the past before the First World War, and see the idiocy and the foolishness for what it was, and the jingoism and the nationalism and the militarism and ism, and he wants them to shape the world anew and make a better attempt at it in the ashes of the Second World War. So you've got to be clear on the difference between when it was written and when it was set. Some specifics for you for context. Certainly for Sheila, the female suffrage mass demonstrations and militant campaign is really important. That's bubbling away for most of the early part of the 20th century, reaches its peak in the teens, where the votes for women and the suffragettes are chaining themselves to lampposts. They are being arrested for trying to get the vote, trying to have their voices heard, trying to be listened to. They get arrested, they get imprisoned, they go on hunger strike, they're forced fed, they're beaten, they're incredibly brave. Emily Davison throws herself in front of the King's horse at the Derby and tragically dies. All of that stuff is relevant to Sheila. Sheila's a symbol of this, of a young woman finding her voice, who is patronised, and her parents they're very condescending to her. They speak down to her. They call her hysterical. They say she's overtired and she's acting like a child at the start. She gradually finds her voice and finds her confidence, and to the end, where she is, after the inspector leaves, she's basically like the inspector. She almost takes on his voice, his roles, his behaviour and his mannerisms even, and certainly some of his rhetoric. And then Inspector Calls is set there in 1910 and 12. Titanic was 1912. Emily Davidson, 1913. I mentioned her. She chucks herself in front of the horse. First World War, obviously, you got to know that, and then women get the vote off the back of that. But all of those are perhaps relevant to Burling's stupidness, choppedness, where he's on about the, war's not going to be inevitable, fiddlesticks, the Titanic's unsinkable, there's going to be no labour strikes, blah, 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 all the rest of it. And you have this growing labour movement that gains power for the first time in 1924, big strikes in 26. Second World War, you will have to know, obviously, and specifically the Blitz, 1940. Burling references that in terms of his stupid predictions for the future, where he says it's going to be fine, we're going to have a great time in 1940, and he seems even more stupid. And Inspector Calls is written in the ashes of the Second World War, and that is a time of possibility and hope, but perhaps also desperate hope, that it's clear to them if they're not doing things differently, they're gonna have to keep learning these lessons in fire and blood and anguish, and on and round it will go. Blood will have blood, they say, as it says in Macbeth. And so he wants them to seize that moment, that spirit of 1945, where they, shortly after the Labour government comes in, massive public housing programme, nationalisation of the railways, NHS is created in 1948. On a global scale, the UN is founded, so there's much more perhaps of an appetite for this sort of left-wing ideals of solidarity and internationalism and so on. So those are some specific things you could be referring to in terms of some of the characters and some of the ideas in An Inspector Calls. Okay, if you're doing this as a timed walking talking mock practice, you now have 45 minutes for that question, and you can pause it here. Refer all your paragraphs to the context. Don't forget. Okay, 5 minutes left then. I suggest you check your work through. Don't be lazy. Don't be thick. There's 8 marks available here. So no sloppy errors, and you need to go back over and over and over all your sentences. Are they punctuated properly? And see if you can upgrade your language anywhere. Check for coherence. Check you've got the character's name spelt correctly, because you might not have done in the rush. 5 minutes to check. Okay, that's about that then. I hope that's useful for you. I hope that gives you some more confidence with your exam technique, and I will be trying to do a paper 2, English Lit paper 2 walking talking mock video coming soon, so look out for that.
Pressure.